evening, everyone. I'm Laura Diaz, the engagement reporter for the Fresno Bee, and welcome to our live discussion, Latinos Vote 2024, Why Vote in Their Primaries. Tonight, I'm joined by an amazing group of reporters and panelists, and over the next hour, we'll chat about the importance of Latinos' participation in this year's election. This event is brought to you by La Abeja, a reporting team formed by journalists from Vida del Valle, the Sacramento, Fresno, and Modesto Bees, focused on Latino issues across California. A quick reminder that La Abeja sends out a free weekly newsletter on Wednesday mornings. If you're watching because you heard of the event through our newsletter, muchísimas gracias por su apoyo. And a special thanks to all of you who submitted questions in advance for our panelists. We'll get to as many of them as we can tonight. This event will be broken into two segments, each about 30 minutes. And in our first segment, we will talk about why Latinos' primary vote is so crucial with Poder Latinx. Then we will play a voter-themed game of loteria hosted by the Fresno-based social justice law firm Ciden Macedo with Aida Macedo. So let's get started. First up, we have Giselle Gasca. She's Poder Latinx's West Coast Regional Manager. Poder Latinx is a nationwide nonprofit organization dedicated to building Latinx's community's political power for them to become the decision makers in the country's democratic processes, specifically in matters related to the economy, immigration, and environmental issues. Thank you so much for joining us, Giselle.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me today to this important conversation about the Latinx vote. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. As we've heard through the last several years with these very highly mediated elections, Latinos or any other ethnically diverse group and communities are not a homogeneous, monolithic group. D. Gavaldon, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Gavaldon, from Sacramento asks, is the Latino vote any or more or less important than anybody else's vote? And how do you define the importance of the Latino vote?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your question. And I think it's very clear the Latino vote makes the difference, especially here in California in the Central Valley, where there has been historically tight races where the Latino vote can be the determining factor in local elections that have direct impact in our families. Just to share a little bit of facts with you and information, an estimated of 2.4 million Latinos live in the central San Joaquin Valley, where they make up an estimated of 54.8% of residents, according to the July 2022 census, and it's only expected to grow from there. So according to the California Department of Finance, the Central Valley is expected to add about 5 million people by 2060. And I think this just gives you an idea on how many potential voters, Latino voters there is, and how we can impact elections. There has been elections in the Central Valley that have been determined by a very short margin of votes, which is the case of Congressional District 13 race, which was where the one of the candidates won with a little bit over 500 vote difference. And we also had a state Senate race that was determined by only 14 votes. And in these districts, these are largely majority of Latinos who are registered to vote here. And we really play a significant role in the outcome of these elections. If we talk about local races, we can see that there's been some local races, city council races, where there's been a few votes that have really made the difference. So just to kind of emphasize the power of the Latino vote, we have the power to really turn these elections around and make sure that we have the right representation.
Noted. And talking about those percentages and Latinos being prominently present across California, according to the Public Policy Institute of California, Latinos, who are California's largest ethnic group, represent 35% of the adult population. But according to a survey of theirs, they account for only 21% of those who are most likely to vote. In comparison, white, non-Hispanic people are 41% of the state's adult population, but represent 55% of likely voters. Jose Altamirano from West Sacramento asks, why is the number of registered Latinos Latino voters who vote so low?
Yeah, no, and this is a great question. Again, thank you for the question. And I think if we can see, there is definitely a lack of voter education. We know that our communities face economic, immigration, and environmental problems that really take their mind off of voting. And this combined with the lack of outreach that community to communities really influences the voter turnout when it comes to our Latino community, right? Voting is usually not a priority when you're trying to put food on the table, but perhaps we don't realize that even the cost of groceries can be tracked back to voting. And the battle really is within the voter registration because Latinos had the lowest voter registration amongst other racial and ethnic groups during the 2020 election, general election, at 61.1%. And this was more than 10 percentage points lower than the 72.7% registration rate for all voters, regardless of race. However, once registered, 88% of Latino voters cast their ballots, which is only 4 percentage points lower than the 92% of registered voters who cast a ballot regardless of race. So this really just shows that there's a lack of outreach towards the Latino community. And once they know the importance of the vote, they will get out to vote and they will get their ballots to the polling. They will cast their ballots. So there is definitely a gap there that we're trying to fill.
Noted, Giselle. Thank you. At the start of your answer, you mentioned how there can be lack of motivation and how sometimes voting can affect multiple things across people's lives, even the cost of groceries or the access to them. And so our next question ties into that a little bit. In the greater majority of California's 58 counties, the 17 to 25-year-old age group forms the smallest age group registered to vote. And the percentage of people in those ages and those years, they are sometimes outnumbered 2 to 3 times more, but by other age groups. And for those young adults, for those young Latinos wondering if they should or should not participate and register to vote, what is your advice? Why go and register? Why go out and vote?
You made a really good point there. You touched on the youth vote. And if we look at who shows up to the polls the most, it's usually white older males who show up to the polls. One of the efforts that Poder Latinx has been doing since we started operations in California is going into the high schools and the community colleges to register young adults because we recognize the power of the youth vote. And really, when we look at the statistics, when we unite and when we care about the issues, we turn out to vote and we have the power to influence elections, not only as Latinos, but also as part of the youth vote. And I don't think we realize that sometimes. We don't realize that our vote is so powerful and we are voting not only for the right representation, but also, elections come with consequences. Whoever is elected into office, whatever bills and laws are implemented, will leave consequences for generations to come. And we will be affected by them if we don't turn out to vote. So even when we think our vote doesn't matter, even when we think that we might not have all of the information, it is important that we start paying attention because our life really do depend on this. So just think about that when you're trying to decide whether you want to turn out to the polls or not. You're not only voting for yourself, but you're voting for your family and for generations to come.
Thank you, Giselle. And then that last bit of your answer, you mentioned information, and that ties into our next question related to low voter registration and political low turnout, as we've spoken. Michael Morales from El Centro in Imperial County asks how to combat misinformation spreading through Latino communities and what can individuals do to help those around them be properly informed.
Thank you for your question. And the number one thing when it comes to misinformation is to make sure that you are seeing where the information is coming from, right? We have to make sure that you're looking every political campaign, every political proposition. They always, they are by law, they need to say who is paying and who's endorsing certain things. So you need to be making sure that you are seeing where this information is coming from. And also, the power of social media, right? We know that there is so much information out there that sometimes it's not accurate. So one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do is to make sure that you're working with nonprofit organizations, nonpartisan organizations that can provide you with reliable information like Poder Latinx. I invite you all to follow us on our social media pages and keep up with our website at poderlatinx.org to make sure that the information you're getting is not only accurate, but is also it's non-biased, right? So I would start by saying, make sure you're seeing where your information is coming from. Not everything you see on the internet is true. And make sure that you are paying attention to who is paying for this information, who is paying to get this information to you.
Noted. And Giselle, you mentioned people can reach out to Puer Latinx if they see stuff online that they're wondering about. What about things they see on WhatsApp, for instance? I know a lot of us Latinos depend on WhatsApp to talk to our families and sometimes get our information. So if they have any question about messages through WhatsApp, can they reach out to Puer Latinx too?
Of course, we actually have our own WhatsApp group that it's actually growing here in California, that we also invite you to be a part of to keep up with elections. And if there is at any point in time any misinformation out there that you might feel that you might be questioning, you always feel free to reach out, whether it's through our social media pages, through our website, or you can contact us directly.
Noted. Thank you for the detail. Going a little bit more into the solutions part of the challenges we've spoken about and to contextualize the data that we've brought forward, um, Laura Denise Curiel from Los Angeles asks, what is the biggest struggle you think Latinos are facing in California? And how can voting in the primaries help relieve those issues or solve those issues in the near future?
There are many issues here in California that really affect really the voter turnout, especially amongst Latinos. And I think I touched on this a little bit on a previous question, but when our community faces economic, immigration, environmental problems, especially here in California, we're affected by the wildfires, pesticides, a lot of issues around environmental. Voting always becomes at the lower of our priority list. So when we're talking to voters, when we're registering voters, we hear this a lot. People are concerned about how they're going to put food on their table. People are concerned about how are they going to pay their bills. And if somebody's sick at home, healthcare is definitely one of the most important issues. So when we see that our community has all these issues, right, that are coming up, voting does not become a priority. And we have to start there by connecting the importance of not only voting, but being engaged to all of these other issues. Because when we really think about the cost of groceries, when we think about the cost of housing, right, it's a big issue here in California. All of these, in one way, shape, or form, they can be traced back to who we are voting for, what we're voting for, and whether or not we're having a say in all of these laws and processes that are happening within our state. So we need to start there by knowing and realizing that even the air that we're breathing traces back to voting. And if we're not casting our ballots, if we're not being engaged, we're sitting on the sidelines. Others are making these decisions for us.
Noted. Giselle, you talked about starting to vote as a part of becoming involved and influencing these issues. And talking about starting this year, first we have the primary election coming up on March 5th, and then the general election later in November of this year. Carmen Fuentes from Livingston and Patty Gaynor from Sacramento sent in almost the same question. They asked, what are some ways we, the community members or individuals in their own spaces, can encourage their communities to vote in this primary election that's coming up in a few days? And more specifically, what is the best way for Latinos to help get other Latinos to vote this primary election?
This year, there is so much at stake, and I cannot emphasize enough the fact that elections come with consequences. And I think we need to start by just bringing awareness that there is an election in March. A lot of people wait and hold on to their ballots until November because they are not aware that the election is in March and their ballots need to be sent before then. So it starts there. It starts by spreading the right information and guiding people to the right resources to make sure that they get out to the polls. One of those is reminding them about March 5th being our primary election. Also, reminding them that in California, we are privileged enough to be able to register to vote up until the last day of the election. Some people think that maybe because they didn't get to register on time, they might not get a chance to vote. However, in California, you can register up until the last day and still be able to cast a provisional ballot. So being a voice and being able to share the right information is going to be key. The other thing also is encouraging our friends and family that maybe might not be eligible to vote, but they can still be active. They can still participate in other ways. And it starts at home. Start having these conversations about the importance of having a say in our democracy. And when we think about whether we should vote or not, I think sometimes it's past that. As Latinos, we need to start thinking about the consequences of not voting and not just how it relates to our life and how it can make a difference, but also what happens when we don't vote. We are giving up our voice, and we are not flexing the political power that we have as Latinos.
Thank you, Giselle. Part of your answer there, you mentioned motivating even family members who might not be eligible to vote for whatever reason, be it age, immigration status, whatever it might be that might be affecting their ability to vote here in the United States. And that leads exactly into Natalie Santamaria's question. She's from Bakersfield, and she asks, why is it important to help or motivate even those not eligible to vote to get involved in these elections? And what are examples of that?
I think this is a question that's very close to my heart because I myself am not eligible to vote, and I hear it over and over again. Why are you so involved? Why do you care? Right? And I tell them that because I know my life is at stake, the life of my family and my community. So even though I cannot cast a ballot because I am not a U.S. citizen, I am doing my duty and I'm participating in this democracy by making sure that I encourage others to get out to the polls. So I think that's the best way to look at this. If you can turn out at least your family members to vote, you're already putting in your part. And if you want to be an overachiever and invite your family, friends, use the power of social media to bring awareness to the election. But also, there's other ways, right? You can be an advocate for your community. You can write a letter to your representative to uplift some of the issues that matter to your community and that are impacting your community. And you can also always make a call, like I mentioned, write a letter and just be a volunteer, right? Be a volunteer to help get out the vote in this upcoming election, especially this primary election, where not a lot of people, one, show up to vote, but also there's an important it's an important election because there are things that can be decided in this primary election, like local board of supervisor races, right? And there's other things as well that can impact our daily lives at a local level that will be on the primary election.
Noted. And just to reiterate that last bit of your answer, a few moments before you mentioned how sometimes people receive their mail-in ballots this season, this spring, and keep them until November, but they needed to be sent in before the election day on March 5th. And that's again, March 5th is election day for the primary here in California. Can we just reiterate again, why is a primary election important? Why vote now? And what effects does this have in the general election?
The primary election will set the tone for the general election, right? Just like there is elections that can be decided in the primaries that what might not make it to the general election, such as the Board of Supervisors at a local level, which can many times be decided on the primary election. We also get an opportunity to choose the two top candidates that will be going on to the November general election. So some people want to hold off until the general election, but if you are supporting a candidate, or if you're hoping for an outcome within an election and you don't vote in the primary, there might be a chance that your candidate or whoever you're trying to support might not make it to the general election. So this is our opportunity to really vote on who we want to be part of the general election. And also, like, it is our duty to make sure that we are not just giving up our voice, but that we are having the accurate representation. Sometimes when we don't vote in the primary and then we look at the ballots in November and we wonder, well, why are these two candidates here and not another person that could have been a better representative? It's often because of that. They didn't get enough votes to make it to the general election. So this is your opportunity to vote for those who you want to be part of the general election. And I think another thing that is great here in California is that although your political party does determine who you get to vote for in the primary elections for presidential candidates, you can always, if you do it soon enough, you can always request your ballot to reflect either the political party or the candidates that you want to be on your ballot and that you want to vote for. So I know that can be a little bit confusing for those who are not very informed about how the primary election works. But that's why we encourage you all that if you have any questions in regards to what does it mean to be able, why do I get certain candidates on my ballot during the primary? Or why might I not have vote for the people that I would want to vote in my primary ballot? You might have the wrong ballot. It doesn't mean you cannot vote. It just means you need to request it. So once again, I would encourage you all to reach out to Poder Latinx to make sure you have the right information and you get to participate during this primary election.
Noted. Thank you for clarifying that point for us. Is there a final message you would like to leave the community with tonight for everybody to be aware of?
We as Latinos, we have so much power and we continue to give it up. We give it up when we're not voting. We're giving it up when we're not engaging. And we have a very unique opportunity here in California to elect the right representatives and make sure that we get the representation we deserve. So especially in districts where we have a majority of Latino registered voters. So I encourage you all not only to register, but to bring awareness and uplift this primary election because it will be crucial. Elections do come with consequences, and we don't want to have to look back and say, I should have voted, I should have done something about the outcome of this year's elections. So I encourage you all to register to vote. You can go to our website, poderlatinx.org. You can find information there about how to register to vote. I encourage you all to remind your friends and family, and even if you can't vote, I invite you to take action. You can also find upcoming events in our website where you can participate, you can volunteer, and you can get involved. And again, just make sure that you're keeping an eye out on the information that's being provided, that it's being fed to you either via social media or news. Make sure that you always look where it's coming from and that you stay informed. Be an informed voter.
Thank you, Giselle. We all appreciate you coming to visit us tonight online and sharing your insight with the community. Again, thank you so much for your contributions to helping Latinos vote this season and in seasons past and making time for us today. Up next, I will pass it along to my fellow Fresno Bee reporter, Eric Galicia. Here's Eric.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Eric Galicia, the Madera County reporter for the Fresno Bee. In this second segment, Aida Macedo of Seven Macedo Law Firm will lead us through a conversation on voter education and a game of election loteria on what to know about the election process. Thank you for joining us, Aida. I'll hand it off to you from here.
Thank you for the introduction. I have a slide presentation, so if you could help me out, thank you so much. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us live to this important conversation. I think because of the state of politics in our nation right now, some people are turned off by politics, are turned off by elections. And I want to tell you, don't check out. Don't leave the room. Don't leave the conversation. Stay in it, because as Giselle said, your vote really does matter, and it does have an impact on your everyday life. So with that, I want to make it a little bit more fun. I'm going to have Eric jump in and out and answer some of my questions. But we'll get started. Eric said, can we go to the next slide, please? One more. A little bit about us. Our law firm and consulting firm is called Seven Macedo. We are operated, fully operated by two Latina lawyers. We have offices here in Fresno and in Los Angeles. And we've always had a deep commitment to the community and voting rights work. We've been doing poll observing, nonpartisan poll observing for the last 10 years in Fresno County and Tulare County. And so we've learned a lot. We've trained a lot of organizers on the ground and folks who really care about our community. So thanks for being here. Next slide. A little bit about me. I graduated from UC Irvine, of course, political science major, no surprise there. And I went to law school at UC Davis. I'm a first generation professional. I like to tell everyone, Chicana, Mexicana, Americana, very passionate about civil rights and voting rights. I am a mama to a 2-year-old, and I'm an attorney and an entrepreneur. So a lot of the issues that Giselle talked about, a lot of the issues that we're talking about has affected me personally, right? As a Latina growing up in California, now as a mother, things I worry about in the future of our state and our country. Next slide, please. So I'm going to touch a little bit about what Giselle talked about. Why should you vote? Right? I started this presentation today by telling you not to check out of the room. Don't leave the room just because politics can get ugly, just because you don't want to have that conversation with your family. You don't want to get into that argument over politics, right? But there are many reasons why I think that you need to stay in the room, why you need to have those difficult conversations. So I want you to think today and ask people, like, why do you think Latinos should vote? Why should anybody vote, right? But specifically, what we're talking about today is the Latino community. Why should we vote? So this is my first question of this game of loteria. So Eric, do you want to chime in on why you think people should vote?
Well, there are obviously a lot of different reasons. It might be a little bit different for everybody, right? But personally, right, when I think of why I should vote, I think, I always have people like my parents in mind. Like yourself, I'm a first generation Chicano. My parents came over here, the old fashioned way, sin papeles.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think about them a lot, and how hard they've worked in order for me to have the opportunities to vote.
Right.
And if I'm not voting, it's just something that, seems to me like I should be doing to honor the sacrifices that they've made and exercise rights that they didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason.
You get a frijol because that is on my list. So next slide. So one is what Eric's talking about is exercise your privilege, right? Like a lot of our parents or us ourselves are immigrants here, and we were not given the right to vote, is what I like to tell people. We fought for the right to vote. We demanded the right to vote, right? So this is a privilege that we have as folks that are US citizens in the United States and eligible to vote that many others wish that they had, right? There's a lot of conversation right now about voter suppression, about people being challenged, about voter ID laws, which I will go into. And we have this privilege to be like, no, you don't get to take away my vote, and you don't get to say what I do with my vote. And I'm exercising this privilege for my family, right? For the sacrifices of our family and the sacrifices of our communities. And so I have here a list, vote for those who can't. Giselle shared, that she's organizing, she's involved in our democracy, even if she's not eligible to vote. But we have that responsibility to our families who maybe cannot vote yet, or maybe, who are not eligible for immigration reasons or for other reasons, but are still impacted by the policies that are produced by our vote. My second thing I put here is don't let them win. So in the past 10 years that we've done poll observing throughout the Central Valley, we know for a fact, based on observation, testimony, and experience, that there are people out there who don't want you to vote, right? When Latinos vote, certain candidates lose, and that doesn't benefit the majority power in a lot of the state of California and throughout the nation, right? So don't let them win. Local issues matter. And I don't think we ever realized an example of this until the pandemic, right? People were like, why does the school board get a say as to whether my kid can go to school? Why does city council get to say what resources we get and what stores get to open, what stores get to close, right? People realized like, oh, we depend on all these services that are affected by local boards, right? Like water boards, city council boards, school education boards, the county boards that manage public health in our communities. So a lot of people focus on the presidential election because that's the most talked about on TV and the most popular. But I actually think that the local elections are the most critical for us in our everyday lives. And so don't give that up. Don't give up your say to have that impact on who gets to be in office and represent you. So we can go to the next slide. So my first question here, which I already gave you the answer, so it's kind of hard to put it up for a loteria challenge, but who is eligible to vote? So in California, I already said you have to be a US citizen. You have to be at least 18 years old on election day. So for this year, election day is March 5th. And there are two other provisions for your eligibility. One is that you're not currently in state or federal prison for the conviction of a felony, and that you're not found mentally incompetent to vote by a court. And there are some details that I didn't put in here, but folks that are incarcerated or impacted by our criminal justice system are not always just not eligible to vote. Folks that have already done their time and are no longer under parole or probation are eligible to vote. So if this is something that affects some of your family members or your friends, please have them look into it. Don't let them check out. Because there are a lot of folks who think they cannot vote, but they are eligible. Okay, so next slide. The first thing that you should do is register to vote. If you're not sure if you registered, I have some links up for you. The Secretary of State in California is our representative who runs elections for us. They have a really great website. I have her link here, and you can just put in your name. I think it asks for your date of birth, And you can check where you're registered to vote. If you've recently moved, you may need to re-register to vote. The great thing that our previous panelists talked about in California is that we have same-day registration. So let's say you're talking to your prima, your tia, your tío, your abuelita, and they're like, we didn't register to vote. You're like, okay, let's go. Let's go right now. It's March 5th. Let's go and take you and register you on the spot, right? A lot of states don't have this. This is something that we have that is very helpful for like our busy families, right? Our working class families who are not just sitting at home waiting for the election to happen. So I encourage you, if you're not sure if you're registered to vote or if you just forgot, just show up on March 5th. And you could do same-day registration, and you do what's called a conditional voting, which, you know, they'll verify all the information, and your vote will be counted after. Next slide, please. All right, so Eric, I'm going to bring you back on. What do you do when you are preparing to vote? Take me through like the steps that you do.
So this time I think I registered when I went to go renew my DMV, my California driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
And when they sent me my voter information packet, I pulled out my ballot and I started going through Fresno Bee election articles,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
which I
that's
encourage
good.
everybody to do. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and kind of, you know, just read up on everything that was on my ballot before I filled it out. And after that, I started looking for what my closest ballot drop box was, and it turns out it's right across the street.
So you did your research based on like articles. Did you talk to anybody about your recommendations, or did anybody did you ask anyone for recommendations, or how did you do your research besides the articles?
Well, I talked to a couple people about, you know, measures and city candidates, but it was mostly based on reading what I've read in the news. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, thank you for sharing, and I think, you know, some of us who are college educated, and, you know, I'm assuming that Eric went to college. I don't know if he's a journalist, so I think he probably did. But we often like go to the internet, right? And we research like, who's this on the ballot? What has been said about this person? Blah, 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 right? But I do want to encourage you to make a plan for yourself to vote, but also make a plan to talk to your family about who's on the ballot. What are the measures? Like, why is it important? Who are they? Because like Eric mentioned, everyone will receive a vote by mail ballot, or you'll receive a sample ballot, which is exactly the ballot that you're going to vote on if you vote in person. And it can be very overwhelming. It's basically, I think, a novel. It's like, I don't know, 10 to 50 pages. The language, I think, is very complicated to understand. Sometimes folks that don't speak English don't get the correct sample ballot. They still get an English ballot. So they have to designate that they need a Spanish ballot, right? Either way, even the Spanish ballot sometimes is difficult to understand. So I encourage you to make a plan for yourself to vote, but also make a plan to engage your community, engage your family, engage with your friends, right? Don't check out. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. You know, why are you voting for this person? Do you really like them? Like, what have you heard about them? What experience do they have? Why should they sit on the board of supervisors? What is their history of voting for things that impact the Latino community? Where do they stand on workers' rights? Where do they stand on public education, for example, right? How are these measures going to be paid for? What is the tax rate that's gonna go up? How is this going to affect us, right? Have those conversations. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. Put it on social media. Go on Twitter. Have these conversations. You know, that's how we're going to get folks to engage and be there, and to not walk away from like this opportunity to have an impact. So, you know, plan ahead of time, but also don't forget to turn in your ballot, right? Like Giselle said, some people hang on to their ballot because they don't remember what day is election day. The primary is in March. The general election is in November, right? So you have to turn in your ballot by election day. In Fresno County, for example, we are a voter choice center county, which is great. That means that I think a month before election day, voting centers throughout the city and the county of Fresno are open, and we can just go in and vote like way ahead of time. And we don't have to wait until March 5th. And we don't have to go to a specific polling site. We can go to any of the voting centers, right? Fresno County has that. Other counties don't. Tulare County and Kings County, other counties in the Valley don't have that. So you do have to go to your polling location. But you could do early voting, right? You don't have to wait until the last minute. Next slide, please. So filling out your ballot. So in a lot of places throughout California, like in LA County, there is electronic voting, which means there are tablets at the voting location, at the polling location, that you fill out as your ballot. There are still a lot of counties that have an actual paper ballot that you have to fill out, right? So I have here, darken the oval using a black or blue pen, correct any mistakes. If there are any issues, talk to the poll worker at the voting center. Place your ballots inside. If you're filling out your ballot at home and you're going to drop it off at one of those mailboxes, make sure that you put the ballot in the envelope, right? Take time to to plan a little. Try not to do it last minute. And make sure you seal the envelope. And it's important that you sign the envelope, because they will verify your signature with your registration card. And if it doesn't match, it can be challenged. So some of you may have heard, maybe in some elections that are really, really close, where the county clerk who administers local elections will say, hey, this signature doesn't match the registration card. And so the folks that are fighting over that vote, are like, yes, it does match, it doesn't match, blah, blah. But if you don't sign it, that's not even an issue, right? So so make sure you sign it. If you lost your ballot, that's okay. Contact your county clerk office, or just go in person and vote. They'll give you a provisional ballot, which provisional ballot just means that it's like an interim ballot while they verify that you're eligible to vote. But just because you lost your ballot doesn't mean you can't vote. Next slide, please. So some of the common issues that we've seen at the polls in the last decade of doing this work is, there's a lot of confusion about when people need to show an ID to vote. The simple answer is never. The more legal answer is there are certain times when you need to show identification when you first register to vote, and the county clerk needs to verify that information. But there are specific IDs that you can use. You can use various IDs, not just, a California ID. But the issue comes in with this that we've seen when, a poll worker maybe is just wanting to ask for ID from somebody to look up their name in the roll. And I don't know if you all feel this way about the Latino community, but with my mom, if anybody of authority asks her anything, she's like, gets nervous. And she's like, yes, here's the info, or no, I don't know. And they get like frustrated, right? This is what I call administrative hurdles to voting that disenfranchises people, especially the Latino community, especially monolingual Spanish speakers. So it's up to us to make sure to educate our community, to make sure we educate our familias and say, hey, you don't need to show ID. Nobody needs to be asking you to check your ID, right? If there's confusion, you do a provisional ballot. And I do want to point out that there is a city in Orange County that is trying to implement a voter ID law, which I think has discriminatory intentions so that certain people are intimidated from voting, right? And I think the Attorney General is telling them, hey, you can't do this. But this is why it's important that we are equipped with this knowledge and we share this with our families to say, hey, they're not supposed to ask you for ID. Like a lot of our families, I think, already feel that we are not welcome in the system of election and participatory democracy. And so it's up to us to be like, no, like you have the right to vote and you don't get to leave this room until you vote, right? And so the second big issue we have seen is language access, where people show up, they have a Spanish ballot, but they have questions about the ballot and there's no one to help them because none of the poll workers speak Spanish, right? Even though, for example, we were in Fresno, which is a large Latino community represented in the population, but they still don't have enough poll workers that speak Spanish. So that's an additional hurdle. You should also know that folks who only speak Spanish, like, our parents or abuelita, abuelito, they have a right to have assistance if they need assistance to vote. So let's say they need help writing or they don't have, they need somebody to just help them because they're only Spanish speakers. They have a right to bring somebody to help them. Also, if they're disabled and they cannot walk into the polling location, they have the right to request reasonable accommodations for the poll workers to come to them, and it's called curbside voting. So if any issues at the polls, my advice to everyone is always ask for a provisional ballot if you're not offered one, right? And so I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and we have a short amount of time here, but I just want you to feel a sense of duty, empowerment, excitement to vote and to get your family involved in voting, and not to let these administrative hurdles or these systems make folks feel that they don't belong, right? And that they don't have the ability to make an impact, especially the Latino community. Next slide, please. Like I said, you have to turn in your ballot by March 5th, 2024 at 8 p.m. If you're going to vote in person and you get there at 8 p.m., you have a right to vote. They can't tell you, oh, sorry, it's 8 p.m. We're going to close this place. Too bad, so sad. As long as you're in line by that time, you can vote. You can look up your polling place. Like I said, if you're not in Fresno County, you can look up your polling place at the Secretary of State's website. You can drop off your ballot early. You can send it by mail as long as you send it before March 5th and they receive it no later than 17 days after Election Day. All right, next slide, please. All right. Eric, what do you know about tracking your ballot?
I know that there is a link that you can look it up with.
Oh, is that because you're looking at my slide? No frijol for you.
I've heard of it before. But...
No frijol for you. So, okay, so this is important, right? Because I think people think, like many of us, including myself, we don't trust certain decision makers of authority and governments. And so let's say they don't have your ballot ready. Let's say you didn't receive your ballot, so you're voting provisionally, or maybe you did receive your ballot and you turned it in. There is like a little little piece of paper that has a number that you cut off from your ballot. I wish I had mine, but it's in my kitchen. So you can, there's a number, and you can actually go online on this website, and it's on the Secretary of State's website too. You put in your information, you put in your email address, and you basically tell the system, hey, I want to know when my ballot is received. I want to know when it's actually counted, so that you can track and make sure that it got there on time. And I do this all the time when I voted by mail, but I vote in person because I'm old school, because I don't trust the mail. But you can make sure that it was delivered. It'll tell you when it was received and when it was accepted, and you'll get an email. You don't have to keep checking the website. So I encourage you to do this. I think it's kind of exciting. I mean, I'm a voting rights geek, right? So to me, it's like, oh, cool. But I think there's some sense of accomplishment. Like, okay, I did my duty. They received it. Next slide, please. All right. So throughout this conversation, I've talked to you a lot about your rights as a voter. I talked about some of the things you should look out for, some of the things you should know, how to make a plan. These are photos of our poll observers in the past who have helped us make sure that people are able to vote when they show up. I think that getting involved in your community with voting rights in any way that you can, whether it be signing up as a poll worker, whether it be signing up with a project like this, like election protection, whether it be signing up with some of the grassroots groups, and just being engaged in the process, I think that you will see and you will experience why some folks vote and why some folks don't, and why Latino voters, in my opinion, have been disenfranchised for a very long time, and what we can do about it as a community. Next slide, please. So I just wanted you to know that this document existed. It's called the Voter Bill of Rights. It's on the Secretary of State's website, but it tells you, I like it because as a lawyer, I like to really know my rights, right? And who doesn't? And I think the Latino community has been targeted by certain groups who don't want us to vote and intimidated to not vote. One, because of the design of the voting process and how complicated it is. Number two, the lack of information in Spanish, the lack of information to folks who maybe don't read and write. And so this is important for folks to know. So it just says, you have the right to vote as long as you register, if your name is on the list, if your poll closes and you're in line by 8 p.m. So it tells you kind of all the information that we went over. You have the right to have a ballot in your language. If you show up, if your tia, your tío show up and they need a Spanish ballot, they don't have to leave that room until they give them a Spanish ballot, right? It's also important for folks to know that people are not supposed to be electioneering when you're voting. Electioneering means, we had a situation one time when a voter showed up to a polling site in Clovis. The poll worker was telling the voter, you know who to vote for, right? Wink, wink. You know who to vote for. Like, kind of using an intimidating tone. And our volunteer reported that to us, and we were like, no, they can't do that. They're not allowed to influence folks and when they're getting their ballot or pressuring them some kind of way. Of course, elections, people running for office and measures are throwing ads at folks and before voting, right? Like on TV, on social media, maybe at their house, but not when they're there to vote. So it's important that you know that this document exists. For our volunteers, we always give them a copy of this, and we send them off to the polling locations with it, because I think there is something special about knowing that, hey, you have rights as a voter, and people don't have the right to take that away from you. Next slide. So I want to encourage you all, if you hear of any of your friends or family having issues with voting, or registering to vote, or not receiving their ballot, or something funny going on, I encourage you to reach out to these phone numbers of nonprofit organizations who have volunteers, just like we did in the past decade, that help people with issues at the polls. And I think this information will be recorded, and I will make sure that the organizers of this event have this information. There's an English hotline, there's a Spanish hotline, there's Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Bengali, Hindi, Urdu, Tagalog. There's an Arabic hotline. And so, with so much going on right now in our nation and in the state, it's important that we make sure everybody feels included in our democracy. Next slide, please. All right. Eric, any last questions you have for me?
Yeah, I got a question. So
I didn't leave much time.
No, but I think this is one that maybe people have gone through in the past. Is, let's say you got your mail-in ballot and you fill it out, and you haven't turned it in yet, right? You're going to turn it in, but you haven't turned it in, and then you start doing a little bit more research, having those conversations with family members, with friends, becoming educated on a measure or on a candidate, and you change your mind, and you don't have to turn. You still have an opportunity to get a new ballot and vote the way you want, right? So I just wanted to reiterate, if you could reiterate that for the people.
Yeah. So what you could do in that situation, you can request a new ballot. You can either go to any, like if you're in Fresno County, you can go to any of the voting centers. If you're in other counties, you can go to your polling site, or you can go to the main voting office in your downtown office, probably. And what they'll do is they'll ask you to surrender they call it surrender your ballot, which means just trade in your old ballot for a new one, and they will destroy that one. And if not, they'll do a provisional ballot to make sure that your vote is counted once. Something important that I want to bring up with this is that there is a lot of conversation from certain political parties, and they exaggerate voter fraud, and they say, oh, people are voting twice, and we shouldn't let certain people vote more than once because this and this and that. The truth is, it's very hard to do that. There are systems in place to make sure that you only vote once. Like I said, they check the system to make sure that your name and your birth date and your your social security number person, you only vote once. So, but I wouldn't throw away your old ballot. I would keep it and then trade it in. All right, next slide, please. I think that's all I have. Yeah. Any other questions, Eric?
No, I think we're able to wrap up. That was very fun and insightful. Learned a lot about asserting your rights, especially at the polling place.
Yes.
Right. So at this moment, I'd like to thank you, Aida and Giselle Gasca, for sharing your time, valuable information on the power of the Latino vote. And please stay in touch with La Abeja by subscribing to our weekly free newsletter, and make sure to follow us on Twitter at La Abeja_CA to keep the conversation going. And if you can, please consider supporting local journalism with a subscription to power more conversations like this. With that, we'll close up. Have a great rest of your evening, and thank you for joining us.